This talk is called Node.js, You Don't Need a Dependency. Thank you all for coming here. I'm excited to be here with you. A little bit about me. My name is Muenzenmeyer. I'm a principal engineer and the leader of the open source program office at my employer. Here's some socials that you can find me at if you want to connect after the talk or anytime. That'd be great. I'm also the author of a book called Approachable Open Source. I wrote this about a year ago, and we're giving away and signing copies after this talk, I think kind of like at the same time or around the same time as lunch. So please stop by and get a copy. I'd love to get it in your hands and also into the hands of people that you might be around, like paid forward type thing. So I, as the shirt might mention, I'm a maintainer on the Node.js.org website. Help with all kinds of things on the web presence there. And really the site is kind of an intersection of all kinds of people and tooling and process things. And there's just a lot of a lot of different things that happen all at once there. And that's kind of exciting. And I also, in helping maintain the site, get to see a lot of new versions of Node kind of come through the blog posts and new releases and things like that, right? And it's a kind of a great opportunity to see the change that's happening within Node, kind of from day to day. It's really easy to miss individual features or releases with everyone's busy schedules, right? I take this as a privilege that I can see some of this taking shape. The talk is about not needing a dependency. I want to make sure to mention this at the outset. The dependencies are great, like the size and vibrancy of the JavaScript ecosystem or the NPM ecosystem, Volt, everywhere, right? Like it's very much in part like we are as successful as we are because of the user land packages that exist in the ecosystem, and we've been able to build upon them for a long time. I also think that there's room for evolution and standard library evolving over time, and like there's room for kind of that innovation and also that coalescence that we sometimes see. I'm also a big believer in this guy. You might have heard of him before, Tim Berners-Lee, Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who wrote this memo a long time back about the rule of least power. Right? Don't use JavaScript if you can use CSS. Don't use CSS if you can use semantic markup, et cetera, et cetera. And simplicity is good in many ways, right? And then this was topical like maybe a month ago or so when it doesn't seem like much time passes between one supply chain attack and the next, and like this was actually a screenshot that the maintainer who got compromised shared as like this looked very legitimate and caused a whole bunch of noise and drama in the community, right? I think that phishing vulnerability exploit resulted in 18 compromised packages, totaling around 1 billion downloads a week. So dependencies, kind of have this double-edged sword in our environment. We're going to talk about some new-ish features today. I only have 26 minutes left, and this is kind of an agenda, so we're going to be cruising through it. If someone wants to do the math for me, it's not going to be great. But we're going to be talking about some stuff that's been around for perhaps a while, but as I said before, we're all busy, and I think the pandemic has kind of like stretched all of our time scales around and kind of forgotten about some of these newer features that have been out the door for a while. Node is releases on a cycle. We're actually talking about that later tomorrow at the Collab Summit, so that might be something that people are interested in as we kind of have this steady march of new features going through the world, right? And this is, if we're talking about our agenda, this is maybe like the spicy take that I have here on some of this, is that these newer and newer capabilities that have come through Node.js over really years represent an opportunity to reevaluate if your front end or your stack or your CLI or whatever still needs a dependency that you've been kind of tried and true using forever, right? So let's get to it. There's plenty of asterisks throughout all of it, right? Standard features into the library don't necessarily have the same capability set as dependencies, so please take this with a little bit of a grain of salt and apply it to your own needs as you have to. So my sample project to walk us through some of these changes is a really simple SBOM parser. You can actually get an SBOM off of any GitHub project today. If you go into the Insights tab and click Export SBOM, you get, it just generates for you. I think it's in the SPIDEX format. I'd have to triple check that. But yeah, it does pretty simple output, right? You give it a JSON path locally, and it just tells you, oh, what libraries composed this this SBOM. And here is the dependency set that makes that CLI possible. The source code is not the hero of this story, so like I don't care about it at all. Let's see, I don't know if I can scroll and you can see and scroll at the same time, but that's all right. It's not exciting. That's totally okay. So we're going to dive into the first one, testing source code. Gosh, we're talking about something that happened 3 years ago, right? Node 16, and testing, of course, gives people all kinds of confidence in release. And for years and years and years, especially if you're talking about in enterprise environments that move a lot slower than startups or your blog or like whatever the zeitgeist might be, Jest has been a really obvious place to turn to. And like there's like we could argue about all kinds of other alternatives like vtest or pick something, right? That's not the point. But this has been the default for so long. It's a part of the OpenJS Foundation. Like it's great. Nothing wrong with it. So here's an example of how we could test something in Jest. Hopefully this isn't terribly exciting or novel to anyone. But there's already some trouble brewing, right? Because I'm using ESM, and it's a little hard to use Jest with ESM. In my experience, you have to kind of supply this flag and this bin path, and it's just not ergonomic, right? There's trouble brewing in how we would want to do this. So now Node includes a built-in test runner, and what's really cool to see is that it's improving with each successive release. It has mocking, it has coverage, it's integrated into the watch mode as well. So like you can explore ways in which you can just use this instead, and you might have to entertain slight differences in how you harness or set up your code, but like it's altogether similar. I'd also mention, I'm not interested in code golf here, but as I said before, the ESM support is still evolving in Jest for 5 years now, and in some experiences, even with like a single test, like Jest is just slower than the Node test runner. It's not worth really talking about it with one test, one suite, but if you look at your code base, it might start to add up. So moving on, we're still in 2022, and watching source code is something that I think we probably take for granted, right? Every framework and tool should do this, or it's not really worth its muster. And for a long, long time, I think people would probably use NodeMon to do this. There's probably other solutions that you might be familiar with. But this is like pretty typical of code bases I've seen in back office applications and on the internet. With AI slop, I'm sure there's probably ways in which we're like reinforcing some of these popular projects to keep using the same thing that we've always used, and it works great, and it has for a long time. But now with Node.js, we have built-in arguments for watch and watch path, and we can replace that npm script with this instead, and it's altogether the same, right? it works for my use case. It might not work for yours. I mentioned NodeMon before, has like far deeper capability sets. You can do like a config file pattern. You can have like specific nors and globs, and like we can do a little bit of that within Node too. And that's all cool. It's getting better all the time. And then I guess critically, any watch mode can survive like a crash of the application, so you don't have to kind of get out of flow to do something. Whew, okay, we're 10 minutes in, and I think we're doing okay. No one has heckled me yet, so we'll just keep going. All right, we're talking about parsing arguments. Now we're into 2023, and it's like recent history, Node 18. And any CLI should probably be able to have like different runtime arguments you want to supply to it. So maybe our SBOM parser can do its standard out, but we also want to support JSON or something else, right? I'll mention like process argv has existed since before I've used Node. Like, has anyone used Node 0? I bet James has. Right, there we go. A couple people. Right, so like, what's the fuss with this? Like, it's existed for a long time, but also a great array of user-land packages have existed a long time too. Yargs, Commander, what have you. And this is, again, very typical of an experience that I would not even think twice about reaching for, right? Like Commander works great. It's built-in help. You can kind of declaratively describe your options. And it's just, it works really nice. Node can also do the same thing, sort of. There's always like asterisks about like its capability set versus, versus a more mature dependency that's been around for years and years. But it might be good enough for your project or for your use case, depending on what you're thinking about, right? The Node version lops off the first 2 arguments by default, which is kind of ergonomic and nice. It's synchronous, and in my cases, it's enough for my needs. It can also do validation against like missing arguments, or if there's extra arguments, just kind of like creature comforts and DevX that helps. There's a lot of really cool tools out there. You can run React in a CLI. You can there's something called Bubble Tea that I like using too. There's a lot of options out there, but increasingly Node is also looking great. All right, now we're into the 20s, right? 2023 and Node 20.6. Environment, this is where like I really started looking at the changelog and like getting super duper excited about this kind of thing. Environment has long been, I would argue, like the purview of .env or .env-x, I think it's called, right? Like this is just how you would do it in many ways, and you would probably have to wire this up, in the start of your app, and you have to do it, within Docker and all this, whatever. And it's pretty, I don't know, pretty simple. But what's cool is that Node can do this too, right? You can delete that .env import, and you might not need it. Again, it can do some pretty fancy things if you need really advanced use cases, but it's pretty dead simple to inject environment into your Node app, your Node CLI now, and that's pretty exciting. You can do overrides of like different layers of env. That work, depending on if you have a local one or if you have a test one and prod, all that works really nicely. This can also, in a configurable programmatic way, you can build your app in a kind of defensive manner where it's like, I need env, and if I don't have it, I can blow up, right? The choice is kind of yours. All right, we're at 17 minutes left. This is good. This is good. We're talking about styling output now. This is, pretty simple, again, like little utility that's native now to Node. And forever, I think people have probably reached for chalk to do this kind of thing. I have lost track of how many times in some random app that I have, the move from chalk to ESM kind of like just momentarily caused a speed bump in my project, right? And maybe you've experienced that as more projects have become ESM only, right? It's kind of nice to not even have to think about it because Node can do this natively, right? And the API is similar, but perhaps requires a little bit of change. I kind of like this array-like syntax actually. And just keep it in your toolbox as something that you might be able to use, because then you don't need to reach for something else. I mentioned that supply chain attack before. I think Chalk was affected in that one, and that's unfair to pick on one particular project, but in essence, right, like the more dependency we have, the more surface area we have. Cool. So there's also terminal color detection, right? So it's not going to spit out a bunch of ANSI control characters in your build logs if it doesn't support it, and you can actually force that in one way or another if you want to. All right, now we're talking about last year, right? Globbing files. And I think that's something that a lot of CLIs would kind of natively want, right? Unix has done it forever, et cetera. So if we have our SBOM parser and we want to be able to operate on more than one SBOM that we're pulling in at a time, you would often do something like this. And I am not terribly interested in the performance impacts of one glob library or another. I do know that does deeply matter to some folks. So there's definitely a lot of space here to explore and see what works best for your project. But again, Node can do this today if you're using this more recent version of Node. So your mileage might vary, but I'd still argue it's good enough. All right. So we've gotten through quite a bit. We're going to take a checkpoint here, and I'm going to drink some water. You should always save before the big boss fight. If anyone was paying attention before, does anyone remember what's left in my journey, my agenda here? TypeScript. All right. Lovely. What's that? Oh, I thought I heard something else. Okay. So, this is an obvious place to start or to keep going. This was made a lot of news last year. So this might be where people have started to pay attention to these newer TypeScript things. And this was a consistent community ask. James in the panel had talked about how the individual contributors in the community it really is who's in the driver's seat for getting some of these things done. And I think that was very much true in this case too. And there's more to that than that, of course. But here's an example of, in our little SBOM parser class, right? We just have some native JavaScript, and we can sprinkle in first-party TypeScript into it if it's a critical piece of business logic that we want to. So I just this again, I think was. Claude just took the schema of the SBOM and put it in there. I didn't particularly care, and then it just actually works, which is crazy, right? If you there was a flag that you needed, and then we kind of made that a default over time. But in January now, you can just run a single piece of TypeScript in your existing code base, so you don't have to wholesale. Adopt or rewrite everything. If you have business critical schema information, or you want to marry your schema, your API responses with something, you can just do it, and that's super exciting. We're talking about removing dependencies, and adding TypeScript is kind of adding a dependency. So I freely will mention that. And here's my very contrived example of hey, look, it's working, right? I did a wrong enum value in our license filter, and we get feedback immediately. So that's cool. We're getting some ergonomics. And I didn't build the project in order to see this. I just introduced a TypeScript problem, right? And so that kind of works. And if you remember Flow, that kind of sucked, especially the way you had to introduce tooling to mess with it. But I would argue that this is still kind of a sweet spot for folks. I think somewhere in this slide deck, I don't remember where, I do recommend you probably should declare your version of TypeScript, so it's not this floating, value. But it's still kind of this really interesting sweet spot for me. I've talked to Marco about this, who helped land the TypeScript support into Node. Right now, there's an explicit failure state or condition that gets evaluated that if we're evaluating TypeScript that is under Node modules, we will blow up. Node will break. And that's very intentional behavior, because we don't want to fragment the ecosystem by having people distribute only TypeScript, right? As much as that almost kind of sounds wonderful, it would be terrible, right? So that's something that is maybe under open governance going to be evaluated someday, but I don't know. I'm not going to promise one way or another. So there's perhaps ever on there. So a lot of this works through stripping types. I said flow style before in the notes. Like that means it takes all the TypeScript that is there and it just like replaces it with white space. There's also an ability that that newer versions of Node can do where we actually transform the types, and this allows more advanced TypeScript features. I think it's like enums, or someone can correct me. There's other things that TypeScript can do that JavaScript just can't do natively. You can kind of tell a node to do that, and what's really cool too is you can tell TypeScript to only allow syntax that is either erasable or supported in this node runtime environment, and that way you're kind of like doubling up your safety in what you're using. So I think that's pretty cool. The last part I have on this this TypeScript kind of feature and mention is when I first started thinking about this talk, and it was like kind of nascent in my mind, like TypeScript, oh my gosh, this is amazing. If anyone's ever written a GitHub action and like turned to the tool that they care about or that is ergonomic to them, it's probably TypeScript or probably JavaScript to write this a custom GitHub action. With the ability to run TypeScript natively, it actually means that you can author your TypeScript actions just like that. And as of, I can't remember what this says, like last month sometime, GitHub updated the runners that are by default running on all the compute loads in your GitHub Actions environment. And now you can just have native TypeScript that that just works. You don't need a complex compilation step. You don't need to like check your dist output into the action, which is like typically a really big no-no, right? It should be like get ignored. Now you don't need it at all, and that just makes it really crisp. And to me, that's pretty exciting. So this was a bunch of like tactical knowledge that I hope you can like bring back to your teams or experiment with, places that you can introduce this into your code base. And I think that's super interesting, but I also want to get into a little bit of the comparison and then also the theory about why all this stuff matters. So here's our before and after, or I guess it's just after. Right now there's like nearly nothing. I said like you should probably still introduce TypeScript as a dev dependency, so you're deterministically all using the same thing in CI and on your team. Cool, but altogether we've made this far simpler. I also want to give a shout out to Liz, who we just met like, I don't know, 20 minutes ago. She also authored something very akin to this talk, where there's like over time, again, like many packages that we can now evaluate whether or not we still need to use them. So my contrived SBOM parser example, mentioned I think 8 of them. Liz goes into more detail. There's like fetch, of course. There's SQLite, which you can now use natively within Node as an internal. And then there's another one is UUID, which is awesome too, like if you're just doing some simple hashing or you just want like something that is reasonably random, right? Like there's options for you in this like emerging, evolving standard library. So thank you, Liz, for that. That's really cool and serendipitous. Like I didn't even know she was going to be in this room when I added that slide. All right. So we'll quickly talk about some comparisons, and I guess again, like this might work for you or might not, and really it's more about awareness and trying to think through, all together, like if these things matter to you or not. Here's some numbers, and depending on what project you're working on, it might be a large impact or not. Going from all of this to nearly nothing, like really seems like a lot. But if you have other things going on, it's still something. But here, this is 2 orders of magnitude less dependencies overall when you think about all the transient dependencies that I'm now managing, right? And I don't know if people spend their support cycles having to work through dependency updates and doing all that work, right? But like there's just less work to do if it's all in your runtime, right? So it's really exciting, right? There's a lot of opportunities here to just simplify. And I had asked AI to summarize, hey, of all my dependencies, how many of these things had a release in the past past year, right? And there's 35 releases. So how much of that time, even if you're being really conservative about reviewing it and going through, like you can save over the scale of not just your project, but your team or your company if people are doing this all over the place. There's automation, of course, but it's still less for automation to mess with, to debug, to fix when you need to. There's kind of an elephant in the room when I've been talking about all these user-land features, and like Jared, I think, is in the room, and I've never met Jared, so hi, Jared. Like Node is great. There's a lot of tools that do similar things, right? We had a great panel on like this. We're not competing with one another. We're complementing one another, and like to me, like this is like our ecosystem and our community working together, trying to figure out what makes sense to innovate and coalesce at a scale that we've never really seen before. We've talked a little bit about that. And this is something that there's actually a nice visual for made by a man named Stuart Brand. He talks about pace layers, where the things on the outside or higher up move at a faster rate. They change at a faster rate, and then the things further down take longer. Right? There's more just like glacial movement and need there. Like this is modeling all of civilization, which is pretty high on like the conceptual model, right? But he has this great like fast learns, slow remembers discussion, and I just love it as a great example of like all of us kind of finding a way to find a place for ourselves in this community, whether you care about new or you care about stable, and like they're not necessarily in opposing camps. They're working together to solve things. There's another concept that does a great job of visualizing some of those pace layers, or like summing it up in one word, I should say. And it's this word is called semathesy. I first heard Jessica Kerr keynote about this, and it's coined by Nora Bateson. And it's really about this like complex, mutually learning system where the inputs and the outputs kind of inform work together, right? And it's just kind of lovely, and it's a great way to synthesize how I think about like these dependencies working together. Of course, like civilization is a pretty large thing to model, so I tried to apply this at like 2 a.m. Into this drawing for open source pace layers. So apologies on the drawing. But you can kind of see, hopefully, yourself somewhere within one of these layers, or maybe many layers, depending on your interests. Right? We have open governance in there. We have application code that changes most frequently. We have libraries and forks. You can read. Right? There's a lot here, and a lot of gravity and a lot of change that is healthy. That's the main point, right? So I've heard people today talking about churn and change and motion, and right, and like that's okay, and that's something that I think I want you to bring back to your teams too. Like if you do see people, like occasionally saying like, oh, one technology versus another, or like, oh gosh, there's yet another JavaScript framework. I can't remember who had joked about that. But like, that's okay, because you don't have to care about all of it, but together we're figuring it out, and I love it. So I quickly click through these things, right? But like there's really room for all of us, and we can celebrate different skill sets and different different passions, right? There's some people who really want to be on the forefront of new technology, and then there's people who are maintaining curl and maintaining the IETF specs and like helping standardize languages and introduce compatibility across platforms. And we need all those people to do things. You probably can't do all of it, and that's okay too. So hopefully that makes a lot of sense. The timer says 2 minutes left, but it's also almost lunch. So like I said, please find your layer, find the layers that make sense to you. There's room for all of us to do this work. I think if you're here already, you might get that, but hopefully I've equipped you with perspective that you can bring back to your teams, your companies, to get them to start thinking about open source software, thinking about the place in which they care about one technology or thing or another, because we need all those people doing those things to work with according to their skill sets and their constraints. All right. That's all I got. Like I mentioned, there's going to be books, I think, outside. So please grab a copy. I don't want to bring them home. So please take one. Thank you.